Hello, Lee. It's nice to meet you in person. Lee
Yes, it's good to
runs,
chat.
yeah, and you run the Metal Prognosis channel over on YouTube, and we
Yes.
we do sort of similar gear reviews and other metal production related stuff. So we've been talking for a while, at least chatting online, just about YouTube stuff, technical stuff. So yeah, uh, why don't you introduce yourself and
Yeah, well, you pretty much did the introduction for me.
oh,
Yeah, my name's Lee. Yeah, from the Metal Prognosis, and yes, I do YouTube videos dealing with recording, gear. Not so much gear reviews, kind of technically sleeps into a kind of review thing, but it's more
hmm
about what's it sound like when you buy something and plug it in. What type of sounds you're going to get straight out of the box, and where can you take it
hmm
using whatever equipment you've got. So not trying to outshine it or out spruce it up behind the scenes. It's kind of like just honest, plug and play. This is what you get. And then I tried to do other videos later on where it's like, all right, if we do have something, how can we fix it up? How can we change it? What are little tricks that I've learned over the years and how we can evolve from there. So that's kind of my background behind what I do on my channel. And yeah, we have been chatting for a while, and I definitely will give you a shout out because you helped me in how to do basic things like screen grabs and
yeah,
captures and things like that, which helped immensely. Because then I
for sure.
started doing digital programs and plugins too, which I couldn't do before because I had no idea on how to capture it properly.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I had to figure it out when I started doing all this too. So um,
Mm.
yeah, which was a bit of an ordeal figuring out how to work OBS and get everything set up so I could get the live screen captures and all that. But it worked out. So so how'd you well, first what's your musical history? What's your background in metal?
Uh, well, from a musician perspective, I play and I perform. When my city's not in lockdown, I perform. At the moment, I just play.
Yeah.
So yeah, first and foremost, I was always in a band, always playing, always loved metal. Um, and then in high school, I got into recording, into capturing and composing and trying to do everything ourselves as best as possible during school projects. And then I was very fortunate enough that when I left high school, I got into audio production school and started that.
Very cool.
Um, that was back in 2000, and it was a very different world back then.
Yes.
So I'm very comfortable with analog gear. I learned reel to reel. I learned everything by getting a Stanley knife and cutting the actual reel and taping it together and getting chalk and marking out spots. And you learn how to take notes. I
Wow.
learned how to take so much notes. So moving from there into the digital world, I'm still trying to get my head around a few things and all that because instinctively I think analog. And how a lot of the VSTs are working now, they're emulating the analog so well, I can really interpret it really well. And it's a weird, like, round backwards and forwards way on how they've done it, which has made my life a lot easier to understand how it's all working and put together now.
Yeah, no, for sure. And
Mm.
I was thankful to, well, even in 2000, I feel like analog was sort of on its way out. I feel like a lot of the commercial
Mm.
studios had switched to digital in the 90s, even though those computers back then were not able to run a ton of plugins. And I'm sure it was sort of a hybrid thing. You know, for a while, computers were just like a tape machine that you could edit on
Yes.
easily. And now, you know, even a laptop or probably a cell phone, you can run any sort of recording software and you can run a number of plugins. You can get a whole band going digitally with guitar amps and drums and everything on almost any hardware, which is pretty crazy, I guess. But but I feel like
Let me
2000,
tell
that
you,
must have been.
let me share this little story with you when I was in my production school. There's one class we did that was digital class. So it was, I think, 1 hour a week, and that was it out of the whole curriculum. They said at the very first the very first class of that, they said, "You're not going to be graded on this harshly. Digital's not going to last in the music industry, but it's a part of the curriculum, so we have to put it in. So we're just going to show you the basics, so you know roughly about it, and that is it." And I got high distinctions in that one class, and I only rocked up to 2 sessions, the first and the last, because I was like, well, I'm not rocking up if you're not grading me for it.
Yeah.
and that's it. But that
Wow.
was their attitude they had. They were like, digital's coming, but it's not going to survive. There's still heaps of issues with it. It's nowhere near as good as analog, so don't ever bother.
So do you think that digital has survived?
I think it's done pretty well for itself, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine editing anything on tape. I did a little bit of like film photography in college, but even at that point, everything was totally digital. But, you know, and that was interesting, but it's not the same as actually editing. And I mean, I've seen people do it, and it just seems like, I guess you get good at like anything, but I couldn't go back from digital.
I hated it. Everyone. A lot of people romanticize the analog and the reel-to-reel and the warmth and the sound and all that, but it's the limitations that it has. And no one remembers every 10 minutes you got to clean those heads and you got to realign it all. You got to make sure it's all in sync, and it's just so much mucking around, and you invest so much time in the equipment that you take yourself away from the actual capturing the performance.
Yeah. Well, that's why studios were so expensive, and you had to really, you know, be trained in it, be an expert at fixing the machines, just running those tape machines. Nowadays, I suppose if you really wanted to, the easy way I've thought is you could buy a reel-to-reel, do everything digital. When you've got a master, throw it through the tape machine.
Yep.
And then you can get that analog warmth without any of the work. You have all the digital perfection you can want. And, you know, but then we have just tape emulation plugins. And I don't know exactly how close they come, but it's certainly a lot quicker.
But, definitely.
Yeah. I think there's also, I don't know, there's a lot to be said for how clean digital is too. And there's a lot of talk of analog warmth and everything, but I mean, realistically, a lot of that is, well, there's saturation, but there's also noise issues. And it's like, do you want an extra layer of noise on your recording? I mean, you might, but like, it depends on what you're doing. And if you're doing a high-end classical production with a super low noise floor, do you want tape hiss? Does that add to the music? I don't think so. I think the dynamics of, you know, a CD are great. And now that the loudness wars are sort of coming to a close with streaming services, it's great. But now we can finally take advantage of that. Like CDs, you know, they were striving for decades to build tape machines that could have a better signal to noise ratio. Then CD comes along and we've got like 80 decibels, and popular music uses about 6 of them. I mean, it's like ironic that, and everyone is like, digital's too sterile, so we just want to go back to noisy recordings. I don't think that's the future, in my opinion. But, and I mean, I like analog gear. I like the analog vibe, but I feel like we need to really take advantage of what digital brings and kind of stop living in the 1960s. Finally.
Oh, absolutely. Like, as I said, like, setup, pack up time, and even maintenance during a recording with analog gear was just a nightmare.
Yeah.
And if something went wrong and trying to troubleshoot it, you could be there for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And every bit of analog gear, because it's not just like a reel-to-reel that you capture and that is it. That's connected to something, which is connected to something else, which is connected to something else, and all synced up in another way. Who knows where the issue is? And you've got to dissect that. And it could be one button that is, for some reason, just wired wrong. So you had it on the right settings, but it was on the wrong settings because it was, just wired wrong. And you're like, great.
Yeah, exactly.
And then trying to get the musos to do the best performance of what they can in that short period where the gear is working and going smoothly. It's a huge challenge. I was talking to a friend who I've done some work with, David Briggs. He used to be in the Little River Band, and now he does mastering. He learnt mastering going to the Beatles studio back in the day. And he was telling me heaps of stories there. And how they did their analog setup there is they had specific engineers that would only do 1 or 2 things, and that is it. Now, he was absolutely assured that those, not really assured, he respected and understood all those engineers were really good in their own regards, but for each project, they came in going, your job is just to like mark the reels. Another person's job is like to cut them and to reline them up. Someone else's job is to take notes on what's going on here. Someone else's job is just to clean this, or to double check the tunes and do whatever else. It's like every recording you had 7 or 8 people in the control room at all times.
Yeah.
During all times. There was a big board that had the song, it had the time, what each verse is, how many bars, what key it's in. Like there's just so much detail and everything. And now these days, you get away with having 2 or 1 person in the control room.
Yeah. I mean, I work frequently in a studio that's a pretty small one, though they get a lot of big acts. So we don't have that many studios, even in a big city here. There's about 7 or 8, and probably 2 of them are really busy working full time. And I work at both of them, tuning pianos. And so, but I get to, talk with the studio guys and see a lot of artists and stuff. So yeah, the smaller one I work at is just 2 guys. And one of them is the owner, and he's full time, and his assistant is there a lot, but I'm not sure if he's even full time at it. I'm not sure, but basically, sometimes they're both there, and oftentimes it's just one or the other. And that's a professional studio. They do live streaming too. It's a video and audio. And usually when they're doing both, then they'll have one guy running the video and one doing the audio. But they get everything. All the mics are set up. They're patched in. It's a Pro Tools system. It's a big screen. The mixer is a tiny console. It's probably about 12 faders, and it's a nice motorized fader thing, but I don't even think there's EQs on it. I mean, it's basically just a motorized fader desk, which is honestly optional. Like they have all that on the PC already. And they have a live switchboard for the video cameras, and the 2 of them can just, one on audio, one on video, and they can broadcast live streams. They've done festivals, anything, large groups, small groups, no problem. They shoot music videos, do full CDs, and that's all it takes. and I think that they're slightly cheaper to work in than some of the bigger studios, so they get a lot more business probably. They have a lot of local groups want to go there probably because it's a little cheaper than going to some of the more famous ones that cost probably a fortune, and I've seen those too.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah. So I got to check out a really great mastering studio near me a number of years ago, and I went in there with a mixtape of some of my first mixes, and I was like, "Can I get a job here?" And he listened to it and was like, "Okay, this is all right, but you don't know what you're doing yet, and I don't really have any work for you." But because I think even there, they have a multi-million-dollar studio, and there's maybe 5 or 6 people that work there or something, and it's a full-time studio. And he's a Grammy winner. Really nice mastering room. I mean, it was incredible to sit in a proper mastering room that's built out. It was brand new, purpose designed, $1 million facility with great speakers. But honestly, as mind blowing as it is in one respect, it's not like the most exciting stereo either. It's almost boring because it's like it's so neutral, it's so flat. It's perfect. There's nothing to the room. There's nothing to the speakers that jumps out as like, wow, what a subwoofer on that. I mean, I'm sure it's got powerful ones, but they're balanced.
Yeah.
So, but still incredible to see that.
Yeah, I've been to a couple of really good mastering studios too. Like I went to the one where Kylie Minogue had a few of her albums mastered. It was current at the time. And that was amazing. Amazing. And even when I went to Dave Briggs's mastering studio too, I was more impressed by the acoustics of the room more than the actual equipment. Some of the equipment was really good, how they got their screens with the meters and making sure it's as pinpoint perfect as possible time-wise, so there's 0 lag on when they heard it and when the phaser went. Because I didn't realize that was such an important thing until they explained to me in mastering why it is. But it's more like the room acoustics on how there was no corners, no chance for sound to bounce back on you, and how they have the fake walls. So I call them fake walls. They're not fake walls, but the walls where it captures in there. Yeah. I thought that's what impressed me the most about mastering studios was just that.
Yeah.
But you are right. Other than that, if you're just sitting there listening to music, it's like, they do make it as bland as possible.
Well, and then you can finally hear all the imperfections in any record and say, okay, it's not the speakers. This is actually the fault of the mix engineer or the band. But yeah, no, I think the room acoustics is where most of the money goes. It's incredibly expensive to build a proper acoustic room. And then the speakers, even if they cost 20,000 or something, they can be expensive, but the room can cost $1 million or several million. So yeah, it's the least glamorous part of the whole setup, but it's the most expensive and the most important.
It definitely is the most important.
Yeah. And I think that is one, kind of downside most of us have working at home. It's just like having good enough monitors and then having an acoustically treated space. Like, how many people working in a home studio have any proper acoustic treatment? I have very little, honestly. I mean, like almost none, basically. I have enough stuff in the room and a carpeted floor that there's not too much echo, but there's definitely some, yeah. And I can hear it in my voice. I can hear it in if I play drums in here, but it's okay. It's dry enough. I can always put blankets over stuff if I need to deaden it more, but certainly for like mastering stuff, I don't know. Neither my speakers nor my room are good enough to really hear everything. But hopefully, I just test stuff in my car still.
Look, I'm in the same boat. Well, my previous house that I was renting, I tried to deck it out as best as I could, putting soundproof stuff all over the place and bass traps as best as possible. And then I realised I was only doing basic mixes and tracking there. So when I moved into my place where I'm sitting right now, I didn't bother with it, because as soon as I learnt the room good enough, I was like, this is good enough for tracking and doing basic mixing. Mm-hmm. And if I do any projects that need anything further than that, I'll go to another studio to do it, or ask for help or whatever, and reassess it from there.
Yeah.
And that's where you just got to think practically. How much do you want to actually set up for what 0.1% that you can actually use it? That's the reason why I never got into recording acoustic drums, because the very few times I do it, I'll go to another studio that has the capabilities to capture drums in a drum room, and get the drummer just to do that for a few days, and then bring all the audio files back into my studio.
Well, that's a big part of recording drums, is the room itself does actually matter. Yeah. Especially if you want a roomy, like a big rock sound that's got that room to it. You need to have a good sounding room. So, it's you can't really do that. I mean, when I record here, I do stick a room mic out, but it doesn't sound amazing, and it's not a very big room, so it doesn't get any kind of crazy echoes. So, the place my band has done our last couple of albums at, he's got a home studio, but it's quite a nice one, and it's a very large basement, and he sticks a stereo pair in a concrete stairwell that leads out to the garage, and it's on the other side of the room, across from the drum kit, in a concrete like echo chamber, and it's quite cool. Once he figured out that trick, he does it on everything, and so he gets a big room sound from just a little concrete stairwell, but it's completely reflective, and it's a good distance away from the actual drums too, so it's a pretty clean signal, and that works well. Otherwise, I don't think the space is super treated. He's done some treatment to it, but it's, I guess, lively enough. And but that's the other thing.
I love little studio tricks like that. I love them.
Oh yeah, no, it's fantastic, and hopefully, I will get a good space set up for all that at some point. But well, with I think a lot of studios, big commercial studios, are really struggling and can't keep the doors open anymore, partly because of everything that's going on with home recording and how easy it is with digital recording. And do you have any thoughts on that as someone in the industry?
It has pros and cons. It really does. I like that there's an option to go bigger, and I like there's options that you can do it more on a lower key space. Definitely. It's really good that now big studios don't monopolize the system, so to speak, and we're not forced to be friends with friends to be able to get a chance to get a foot in the door. Type of thing. How it used to be in the 90s, I remember. Before, I think it's hard for me to say, but because in the mid 90s, that's when I started getting into recording and all that as a young teen, just because I loved music and that was the next progression. So back then, it was pretty much like the equivalent of university projects who had recording equipment or the big real thing. That was it.
Yeah.
And then in the 2000s, all these little studios kept popping up because ADATs were coming a thing and they were more affordable. And I think, overall, I think it's a better thing.
Yeah.
But it is sad when you hear like we have Sing Sing Studios here in Melbourne, Australia. And I remember the day they turned off their SSL desk for the first time in like, I think it was 17 years or something, or 18 years, because they had it constantly on to keep it all warm and to keep that richness going in it. And that was like sad to go, oh, that's, it's really upsetting.
No, it's true. Yeah.
But yeah.
And I hope
it's hard to say what's better and worse, but it's good that there are still like medium studios out there, for lack of a better term, that are still going pretty strong and still can cater for bands to affordably go in there without breaking the bank or needing a contract and insurance from a bigger company to help back them to do it. Because I remember a lot of the big studios wouldn't do it unless there was a record label or a contract taking the actual new contract for them.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we're out of that era or way of thinking. Mostly. Yeah. I'm sure there's still some out there, but mostly.
Yeah. No, it does seem like hard to keep any of that up. And yeah, I do think it's like it for myself, I'm really glad that gear is affordable and that I can, you know, end up, you know, with a decent little home studio as just a normal person and, you know, as a hobbyist. And I don't even need to buy anything super expensive. I've collected a lot of stuff over the, you know, decade and a half that I've been doing this, but almost none of my gear, a lot of it is used or fairly inexpensive, and I don't have the budget or really the, you know, desire to go out and spend $10,000 on a particular console or something. Like I just don't think it's necessary anymore. Much as it would be fun if I had the money, but I'd love to, but yeah. But I think that's great that someone can, you know, with enough, you know, just a passionate hobbyist can end up making pretty much professional level recordings now. And a lot of it does come down to just, are you good at mixing and, you know, are you writing good music or are you recording good bands? Because any studio now, it's like we've got the same tools. There's no longer this jump between, you know, I'm not recording on a 4-track cassette tape and then going to lay it down for real in the studio. It's the same stuff. I've got the same plugins, you know, and I've got access to essentially everything that the pros do, just about. And that is fantastic. And of course, at the same time, we've got, you know, more bands than ever, which is also a good thing. Though I think there's a glut. There's no filter on the music anymore. Because there is no barrier to entry. You know, anyone can put their stuff up on you know, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, wherever, and that's great. But at the same time, like, there's more junk than ever too, and you know, and everyone starts somewhere. So you know, some of the people who might be putting out bad albums now might go on to do something great in a few years, and I hope so. But you know, there's no need to gatekeep anyone, certainly. But at the same time, yeah, like the big studios and the record labels sort of forced a filtering of music, though it's not always a good thing either. They've become the tastemakers and the monopoly.
And that's the one thing I was always against. I don't know how you interpret it over there, but how I see it down here in Australia is commercial music. That always used to annoy me.
Yeah.
Not because I thought it was bad music. I just hated the concept. And this is like the mid-90s rebel in me.
Oh
I
yeah.
hated the concept of them telling me what I should like and what I should
Hmm.
listen to. I've always hated that. Just
Hmm. Oh well, so have
so
I.
growing up,
Yeah.
we used to listen to community radio stations
Hmm.
that had only volunteers,
Yep.
and listen to specific programs like Metal at Midnight and things like that to hear what tunes are coming out of like America and out of Europe and out of Russia and other cool places where like all this amazing stuff exists, and
Hmm.
just and that's the only way we could hear it back then.
Yeah. No, that's true. And yeah, no, I certainly. I mean, I've matured, but certainly in high school, I was definitely an angsty rebel and like didn't all pop music was garbage, and I was too good for that. And I think I have a different perspective on it now. I still am not a fan of most of it, but I can appreciate it for what it is, and it's a lot of it is just marketing and money making. But hey, if I can't really complain that someone wants to make a career in music. I do. So,
Not at all.
and I would never really, I would never be able to bring myself to make, I think, commercial music for the sake of commercial music. It would be great to be successful on that level, but only if it's doing what I want to do and making the music that I want to make. But yeah, that is, and thankfully here in my city, we've got nice community station for the last couple years, which is a total eclectic mix of just a volunteer station, and they do everything world music, and there's poetry, and there's like podcast type stuff, and there's one
Awesome.
metal station that comes on Saturday at midnight, and he came over here for an interview a while ago, since we're like, okay, we're like the metal guys in town, so uh, yeah, so it's nice.
Yeah, well, you reminded me of. Well, we'll talk to you. But first thing is, I tainted myself in a bad way with pop music.
Mhm.
I took a pop, like a seminar on how to write pop songs,
Mhm.
formulated in the best way and how to get it and why. To 135 beats per minute to get that groove as close, because it's easy for people to bop along to, and
Mhm.
how they structure it out. And after I learned that, you can't. And a lot of times I hear pop songs now and I'm like, oh, I can hear that.
It's true. It's
You
true.
know the trade. It's like knowing, the magic trick. You just can't. Oh, I saw where they did that hand trick to move the audience's
Yeah.
face and things like that. And the second thing is going on what you said. I agree with you 100%. Got invited to join a cover band. It was a
Mhm.
paying gig doing corporate after a rehearsal session, and I couldn't do it. It felt soulless.
Yeah.
So many people in the room just felt like they were so like Top Guns by playing other people's, and acting like they had all the success and that, and the tunes and how they were playing it and the whole vibe. I was just like, I can't do this. Like, I just can't. It's ruining the songs for me, and it's ruining it. I last half rehearsal session.
Yeah. No, I could never do that. I mean, well, I guess my first band ever was a cover band, but we were in high school, so and I've been playing guitar for about 6 months, so I didn't care. But other than
Yeah.
that, I've never. I don't think I could. It's almost like it's a different, it's a whole different vibe. And I've been to some like open mics and stuff where we're playing, blues, just blues standards, and that's fine. I mean, I enjoy that for a casual kind of thing, especially because I don't have to show up for any rehearsals. It's just an open mic deal, so that's fun. But other than that, I can see the utility in cover bands, but I could never do that. And certainly around here, like none of the metal bands are cover bands. Like it just seems weird. You get the occasional cover at the end of a set maybe, but even then everyone is very focused on writing original music, and for better or for worse. But yeah, but I think different regions have different amounts of that, and like we don't get a ton of cover bands around here. And I think some of it's like a cultural thing, I guess. And also maybe just like the crowd that my band plays with, the local metal scene we're a part of, there's like no cover bands. Maybe they exist, but I don't think there's too many in the metal world. You know, you get like the sort of the dads playing classic rock and stuff and some blues bands, but I mean, if you're going to do covers, I like the jazz approach where you have jazz standards and but it's not really a cover because they change the arrangements. It's expected that you're going to change the arrangements. You're going to have a different makeup of your bandmates. Yeah, everyone's taking solos and you have like total license to do whatever you want with the tune. You're just using a familiar melody and a familiar set of chord changes. And even then, you can reharmonize it. You know, you can embellish the melody and nobody's going to say, oh, that's not what AC/DC did. You know? It's like, oh, okay. So I think if you're going to play other people's music, you know, go the jazz route. And even when it comes to like rock covers, I always want to see bands take it further, do something different with it.
Well, I think you kind of touched base on that before with when metal bands that you've experienced, and I've experienced the same too, when they do a cover song, maybe to finish off their set or in the middle of their set, I feel like they're doing it more to help you see what their band's all about because they're doing it in their style and putting their kind of twist and touch to it, which I think is good because that means it gives you if you've never heard the band before, it gives you a chance to help interpret on what they're like and you know, how they're rolling. Which I think is really cool. It's
true. I remember a long time ago, the guitarist I still play with, we've been playing together for 10 years, over 10 years now, I think. Somehow. We haven't killed each other. But I saw him playing with an old band years before that. And I had never heard Orion by Metallica. I'd never listened to all of Master of Puppets. And they covered it live. And they didn't announce, or at least I didn't hear it. They didn't say, oh, this is a Metallica song we're doing. They just played it. And I thought it was amazing. It was way better than all their other songs. And I thought like, wow, these guys have like some serious talent and chops. And like they got really good songwriting. And I was so impressed. And then remember actually listening to the whole album later and hearing it on Master of Puppets and like, wow, okay, their best song was a cover, and I had no idea, but it really impressed me. So for a few months it worked until I figured it out. But hey, you know, he plays in my band now, so
yeah.
So all right, let's talk a little bit about YouTube. How'd you get into YouTube, and when did you start doing that, and why?
That's a wonderful question. I've got to think about it. So, how it all started. I think there was two main inspirations of what made me start a YouTube channel. First was I was in a city went into lockdown, so no more band rehearsals, no more nothing. I just finished at the time recording an album and finished mastering it, and we're waiting to see whether we do gigs for it or do we need to release it because who knows how lockdown is going to work. It was all new to us. We had no idea, never experienced before in our life. A company called Black Cat Amps. I bought a distortion pedal off them because because during lockdown I was like, I updated all my studio, updated everything. I just finished this album because I didn't want to change anything while I was doing the album. Because don't mess with anything if it's working. Yeah. So I was adamant with that. But the album was done. So I was like, cool, it's backed up. Getting new studio, new everything, new CPU. Going to go as full digital as I can instead of the approach I took before, which was very analog pushed. And then I decided I'm not happy with my guitar tone, so I want to go guitar tone chasing, which now I know is an endless journey. It doesn't end. But at the beginning of it, I found this pedal called the Gent Tonic by Black Cat Amps, a Ukraine company. So I bought that, and it took ages to come in because shipping was all altered and transport was just all up in. I don't want to say up in the air because that's how transport normally works really good, but it was. It was tangled and not working good. And when I got this pedal, I was like, man, this is really cool. I don't mind this. And the guy who actually came up with the pedal kind of pushed me on Facebook, because I was just doing videos just on me performing songs from my band because I didn't know what else to do by myself. So I was just doing that and not putting it on YouTube. That was just on our Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, I want to hear that pedal. I want to hear it. And I'm like, all right, I'll do a video on your pedal then.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, then I thought I could do this. It wasn't too bad. I reckon if I just change, like, get my wireless mic, which I'm using now, instead of the microphone that I was using before,
Mm-hmm.
and change a couple of things in the studio, I thought I could actually give this a shot. And it's free.
Yeah.
And I'm going to see how it goes. So I did a video for him going, there's your video. This is what I think of your pedal. And if anyone else is thinking about it, they can get something out of it. And that's how it all started.
Yeah. Well, that's
and
great.
yeah, and since lockdown, because we haven't had a chance to do band, in the last 2 years, I think we've done probably 5 rehearsals in between the lockdown periods here and there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a creative savior for me, the YouTube, because it's given me a chance to be creative in a different way, express myself, still be a part of the music community, and meeting new friends like yourself and other people I spoke to.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, as I said, just really be creative. And it's also made me think differently about guitar and different ways on how to capture guitars, instead of, I was definitely stuck in like my comfort zone on how I like to capture guitar and how I like to do things. So now I kind of got the attitude of, let's just try it all.
Oh yeah.
People suggest something to me, I'm like, if I can afford it, I'm going to give it a crack.
Yeah.
What's it going to hurt?
That's true. Yeah.
If it fails, it fails. I've done a few YouTube videos where I'm like, yeah, that sounded really crap. And I don't know if that was my setup or just me, but this is what we got. So, you know, if anyone's got a device, give it to me or whatever, or I might think of something else later on and try it again. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's how I discovered you with your HM300 video.
Yes.
Yeah.
You helped me with that too.
Yeah. Well, and I'd already done a couple on those and some other plugins. I really like the HM2 style pedal. And so, but then I saw yours and I thought, I don't know this guy. You seem cool, but you're not putting all the knobs at all the way. Like that's how you do it. That's the sound. And I figured everyone who's, you know, going to buy this pedal knows that. And that's what they want in a review.
I did not know that.
Yeah, well, you know, it happens. So yeah, it's okay. Yeah. And I think I've definitely feel like, I mean, I've just sort of started a YouTube channel on, well, my channel's, I guess years old, but I started taking it like seriously in 2021 because I'd wrapped up all my projects. I was sort of finishing a bunch of stuff during 2020, got a whole bunch of stuff done, put out 2 albums, and yeah, I need something new to do, and I'd been wanting to do a YouTube channel for a long time, so just starting it, and you know, I learn all the time as I go what I like to do. And I mean, the gear reviews and stuff are like, it's partially just like, it's easy enough content, and it gives me a chance to test out different stuff and like actually give it a good shot and write with it. Because I think for me, I mean, I've always liked collecting gear and stuff, but I might plug it in for a few minutes and either I really like it, or if I don't, you know, just put it on a shelf and forget about it. But this forces me to actually spend like a few hours like treating it with some respect, I guess, and going through and seeing, okay. And most of the time I end up liking stuff once I figure out like how to use it and, you know, how to make it sound good. And then actually, you know, write a song with it. And that's been a lot of fun. I think that aspect of, you know, I always write a new song for every piece of gear I'm reviewing. And that's the fun part for me. But that has just taught me a lot, I think, in terms of using the equipment, but more importantly, just the songwriting aspect of it. Because every time I start, well, I've kind of gotten into a workflow of how I'm going to mix stuff, but every mix is different, and I'm not spending a year on an album. I'm spending a few days on a song, and every song is different. And that really forced me to like expand what I was doing. And I think I've learned a lot about mixing just by doing so many different songs and so many different projects, rather than spending months and months endlessly like tweaking one thing to the point where I lose my mind. So, and you lose your perspective too. I think when
Oh,
you go
absolutely.
like too deep into one project, and it's good to like just keep yourself moving and doing new stuff all the time.
Mm.
I think you
Yeah,
learn
absolutely.
so quickly that way. Um,
Mm.
so yeah.
Yeah, like you mentioned before, like listening to mixes in your car. I do that.
Mm-hmm.
I put it on in the car. I put it on all different type of headphones, different vehicles. I
Mm-hmm.
listen to it as many different type of ways, and then just take notes as I'm going
Yep.
before I go back into the studio, and then approach it with these notes in mind
Mm-hmm.
to help me focus in. Because otherwise, yeah, you do get ear fatigue real quickly,
Yeah.
and yeah, you can get lost
Mm-hmm.
sometimes in your own setup and your own thing.
Yeah. Oh, I've wasted countless hours probably with burnt out ears. Like, oh, I'm hearing this thing,
Yeah.
and I think one of the biggest things that I've learned in the last year doing this is just like trying to mix simply and trying to
Mm.
just use less. And I think there's a a desire as a creative person to want to like put my spin on it, and
Mm.
I have to do this and that with the EQ, and I have to compress this, and I have to use all these cool plugins that I've bought, and
Mm.
um and it just ends up being so counterproductive most of the time, because if you
Mm.
have if you have a good amp sim, it's like they've already spent a lot of time making it sound good, and hopefully
Yeah.
choosing like impulse responses that work well with it, and or I can always use my own, but like then don't always doctor the cab section with a million
Mm.
EQs. I think I've mostly hurt mixes by overproducing them. you know
I spent weeks over engineering projects and then had to take a big step back
yep, just like
because it just
delete it
makes it
all.
rubbish.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I've done
Yeah, I
that
did that
many
with,
times. Yeah.
I was recording a band, and I think I did that exact same thing where I recorded it, I was mixing it for ages, I over engineered the crap out of it,
Mm-hmm.
and then just one day just went, I'm starting again.
Mm-hmm.
Started a brand new session, imported all the audio in raw and fresh, and I was done in like the next day.
Yeah. And it was probably better.
Yeah, and I took
Yeah.
that approach. I was like, just keep it simple. Let's
Yeah.
just what does it not what does it need, not what does it want,
Yeah.
and just let it breathe, let it do its own thing. We spent all the time capturing the sound that we wanted, so let's
Mm-hmm.
use that as the main foundation, not trying to create something that it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Exactly.
I spent years going backwards and forwards learning all these lessons.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes it does take years because
It does. It
you
does.
just
Yeah.
don't know.
No, and like no amount of watching other people do it, on YouTube will really fill in for that practical knowledge. But I think that's like the main. If I had to advise someone in like how to get better at mixing, it's just like don't do too much,
Mm.
because it's almost always just ends up being counterproductive. And yeah, I mean, since I started, I mean, back in 2013 when I did my first project, I didn't engineer it. It was recorded with another guy in his little home studio, and so I got all the tracks, and we did spend a fair bit of time setting up all the mics, and it was a full kind of standard analog or miking the cabs with a whole bunch of different mics. So I had plenty of options, plenty of nice mics. Everything sounded good, and I spent about a year butchering it, and like and going back and forth with my band, thinking like, wow, I've really improved this a whole lot, and then send it over to them. They're like, this doesn't sound good, and I'm like, what? I spent like 20 hours doing this. Come on, it has to sound good, but it didn't. And I would listen to it in my car, and I would hear all these weird things, and it's like just things going on with the EQs, stuff that I don't always fully understand anyways. I feel like sometimes if you do like these surgical notches, you'll end up getting something else will poke out.
Yep.
And when you end up having like 20 different notches, then you'll get all these other weird overtones. Or maybe they're just like being unmasked, but then you either have to deal with them, and it's often just like, are you really improving it?
Yeah.
And be really like careful with EQs and compression. Like don't go too far, because it'll just make it worse.
EQ is so important, but it's also extremely fragile.
It is.
Very fragile.
Yeah. It's like, it's so
And
easy to make it worse.
Because it took me ages when I was youngster learning to realize, because no one actually told me. Oh, they did tell me. They didn't tell me in a way that I interpreted it properly. Mm-hmm. Where if you add EQ, I didn't understand you're adding signal and adding volume and adding body to it.
Yeah.
I thought it was just changing the tone of it. It's like, no, you're actually altering the sound. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I'll be adding EQ and I'm like, see, you can hear it so much clearer now. And then now the engineers are like, no, you just made it louder.
Yeah, just
like
gain stages.
Yeah. Yeah. So it took me, I was 18 at the time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was funny when I look back thinking, yeah, they were right, but I just didn't understand what they were saying until a couple of years later. I was yeah, that makes sense now. I get it. Okay.
For sure, yeah. It's so difficult to learn, and then when you get into multiple, I don't know. I think it's a little easier to think about in the analog realm if you're working from the hardware and plugging an EQ into a compressor, and you've got the meters and you're plugging that into something else, and you kind of know your signal chain, and it's very obvious in your DAW what the signal chain is, but I don't think it took me a while to sort of really think about, like, okay, I've got an EQ going into a compressor and like the order of things. I could have a compressor going into the EQ and all that staging. Like, if I'm boosting a bunch of stuff with an EQ and that's feeding into a compressor, it's changing my compression. Then I've got to go back and change the compression. And you're like, oh, I'll just tweak this, I'll tweak that. But then you're really tweaking a whole cascading flow of things. Yep. And it's just so easy to get lost. And if you just use less plugins, and hopefully, I mean, if the sound is awful on its own, just the recording is bad, there's only so much you can do with it. You can't magically fix it with 25 different EQs. And it doesn't matter what plugins you have. It doesn't matter how good of an engineer you are. You need a decent recording. And with a decent recording, you shouldn't need to butcher it. So,
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's also a case of don't rely on a plug-in preset to fix everything. There's no magic button that's going to bring out the magic digital wand and just fix everything and be like, there we go. There's a phase that I kind of feel uncomfortable with when people say it's professional. This is professional quality. Yeah. Because I've worked in a lot of professional studios and there is no standard. We just do the best of what we can with what we've got. So when people say this whole, if you want professional standards at like professional studios, I'm like, you haven't been in a professional studio then. Yeah. I've seen them go into the storeroom and like dust off equipment and go, oh, let's just try this. It's like like a 40-year-old equipment, and it worked. It's like.
No, it's true, and especially, I mean, it's always fun to watch these documentaries and guys will talk about some legendary gear that's like super coveted today, and it was just like, well, this is the piece of gear that I could afford, and so I bought it and I used it on all my records, and now it's famous. It's like. It wasn't, he didn't go out and buy it back then for $1 million because it was the sound. Like, it was just happened to be, what they could afford, what they were using. I mean, there's some exceptions to that, but a lot of it is just like what gear people prefer. And just because one engineer likes this kind of compressor doesn't mean you have to. And, there's no point. Like, you're not going to get his sound by using the same compressor unless you can use it just like he does. So. I agree.
Like, well, you're talking about the famous Boss, the HM pedal series, and I think it was most famously used, in my eyes anyway, at the Gates, their debut album. And at the time, that's all they could afford. Yeah, they didn't go out of the way and get that pedal to go, here we go, this is us, this is what we're doing. No, they had what they had and they just did what they did. Yeah.
No, their documentary is great. And like he said, he brought in a homemade 212 cabinet and one of the speakers was broken. and he was running a metal zone and an HM2 and some kind of solid state, PV or crate or something, like junk gear by any, professional standards. But I think you have to, separate between people talking in forums and on Facebook and what they're actually doing, and see like, because, you know, do you vet everyone? You just read through these comments, these forums and stuff, and it's like, well, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. He's certainly very opinionated, but have you ever listened to his mixes? Like, is this a guy you really want to take advice from? Like, maybe he is just full of it. There's a lot of that on the internet, so and hopefully we're not contributing to it. But I mean, there's a lot of guys who they have strong opinions and they sound knowledgeable, and I'll try to find, okay, here's their band, here's a mix they've done, and it's like, I don't think this sounds good. So I don't, you know, I mean, not to knock anyone, but it's like, if you, the proof is in the pudding. If you're not really you know, if your work doesn't stand up to it, then, you know, maybe tone it down and try to learn. I mean, we're all trying to learn. You know, I'm certainly not in any way above that. I'm learning all the time, but I also don't usually ever hop onto forums and bully people about gear. I don't think I've ever done that, because there's no point. It's stupid.
No.
And you're just likely to get someone else who knows more than you to call you out and say, no, you don't know what you're talking about. Doesn't contribute.
Oh, look, I've had a few of those, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's fine to be wrong. Everyone is wrong. And the pros are wrong all the time, you know, and it's only a problem when people refuse to learn that becomes dangerous. If you don't ever admit that you're wrong, that's a problem. But I
remember my first album I ever did independently. So I got a band in, I was only engineer. So it was great. So I got to actually put the engineer hat on and not think about anything else but the band and recording. And I did all the edits, did all the crossfading, all the different drum takes, did all this work, put it all together, took it down to the mastering place. He pushed play. This is David Briggs I talked to when I first met him. And he was like, I can't work with this mix. I'm not going to charge you for today, but I can't work with this. I was shattered. I was like, why not? Yeah. And he goes, there's all these frequencies here that if I fix it, it's going to screw up this part. See these toms? They're screwed. I'll fix them now. Toms sound good. Now the bass guitar's all out of whack, and so forth. And I was like, oh my God. So he's like, all right, do you have a sub? And I was like, no, I don't have a sub. And he goes, you need one, because all these frequencies you cannot hear. So it probably sounds good in your studio with your monitors, but without a sub, he goes, it's all screwed. So I didn't realize how much I was EQing in the sub register and altering, but I just could not hear.
Yeah.
And then I had a different engineer come around to my house to have a quick look, and he saw my setup and he was like, nope. Get those speakers off your desk, you got to even them up this way, spread them out this way, and you've got a book out, and he's like, here's a diagram of how it all should be set up. And as soon as I did that and got my subwoofer, I was like, all right, I'm in a different world now. Here we go. And yeah, made a huge difference. But I needed that big mistake and that big kick in the butt where, you know, a mastering guy who said, you know, it's wrong. You got to fix it. And here are some notes on how to fix it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the case. And you know, the speaker placement and, you know, and the room treatment and all that is just incredibly important. And nobody is thinking about that when they start off. And I don't think people realize how big of a difference it makes. Like, I know, you know, I've got my speakers here. If I change how I'm sitting or how close my head is to the speakers, like they're very particular. And I'm sure I'm not always careful of it when I'm just in the zone mixing. But when I think I've got something right, I try to like move around and like make sure that like, okay, is this sitting where I want it here, and like at different volume levels. And I know my speaker setup, you know, my mixing room here is not at all ideal. So it's just a matter of like testing it on everything, testing it on different headphones and in the car. And even then I feel like without a real like mastering room, I feel like I'm always shooting in the dark a little bit. And that's why I feel like it just, I don't trust my ears and my setup enough to, you know, get really crazy with EQ anymore, because I know that's dangerous. And I used to be so like confident with it, just like, oh yeah, that sounds right there, and you take it to another system and it's completely wrong, and you'd never think that, but it just works that way. It's weird.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
It can totally change the balance, and different volume levels too. I like to mix kind of loud, but I always have to check it at a low volume level too. And if it sounds like really totally off when it's quiet, then it's not good. And you can't expect everyone to listen to it on the same speakers and at the same way you're listening to it.
No,
So,
no, definitely not. Yeah, I do the same. I have my volume checks, so I check it low, and there's a certain point, that certain sound break, where you hit that certain volume and it just changes the dynamics. So I'll make sure I hit that point as well and get a little bit louder to do the same thing as what you said exactly, just to confirm that it works on all those different levels.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's some even professional mixes. It's getting better, I think. But yeah, I've heard some, big records that when you really crank it up loud, it's just like it's unlistenable. It's like super harsh. Like I want to listen to it loud, but I think there was a period sort of in the like late 90s to maybe 2010 even where things were too compressed, but also a lot of people, probably a lot of engineers were mixing more towards like earbuds and stuff, which back then were not as good as today's.
Oh.
And like the big now, it's kind of a fashion statement to have big headphones, but it wasn't back then. It was when the little white, iPod earbuds came out, like those were the hot accessory. And so everyone was listening on that. And even in college, when I took a recording class, the engineer was like, yeah, you know what, if you mastered something on iPod headphones, like you'd probably hit, depending on your target demographic, that's probably not a bad way to go. But of course that won't stand up for something that's gonna, live more than a few years.
Yeah.
It's not really a good practice, but he had a point in that if that's your target audience, make it sound good on those. And that's fair enough. But certainly I've seen a lot of somewhat older metal records that are just really harsh when you play them loud. You crank it in the car and it just doesn't sound as good. Now you go back to, Iron Maiden and stuff, the 80s records, those sound great loud. They sound fantastic. They're not over hyped up. Sometimes they don't sound as powerful quiet, but when you play them loud, they're great. And I've always noticed like a big difference that some records sound awesome loud. Some are just like way too harsh. The lead guitar comes in and I'm just like, I have to turn it down. It's hurting my ears. So, but I like to listen to stuff loud if I can, just watch that like 3-4K range, especially with lead guitars. It kills me. The last thing you want is someone reaching for the volume knob in the middle of the cool guitar solo, right? And yet I do it all the time. I do it so much with a lot of even big professional records because there's like this ice pick in the yeah. But do you find yourself working a lot on headphones, or do you rely on your studio monitors all the time, or?
I grew up with studio monitors, so most projects I normally have a couple of different monitors set up. So I'll have my big, like I don't know how to refer it, like Prime studio monitor I have. Then I have my cheaper ones there, and then I plug into headphones from there. So I try to give myself a few different type of stages to listen to. So I do the majority of it on the Prime monitors, and then just kind of confirm with the other ones to make sure that they're working across all different ones while I'm doing it on the spot. And then, as I mentioned before, then I take the mix out and listen to it in the outside world, so to speak, in different conditions just to see. But yeah, normally in the studio, if I'm doing a big mixing project, then I'll have those three as my main setup, having the two monitors and then the headphones as a kind of final touch just to make sure.
Yeah. Right on. Yeah. I think that is a good way to go. And even if you have cheaper monitors, to have multiple kinds. I don't really have the room for it right now. But I would like to next next studio I set up, I want to have definitely room for a couple of monitors and like some bigger ones, some smaller ones. I've always thought like the little Oral X cube would be cool to have. I don't know how practical it is for metal mixing because here's the thing that I'm sure you've experienced with double tracked guitars, the phase issues when you sum it to mono.
Yep.
It plagues me, and it seems to be a problem on every like commercial metal record too. So it's not just something I'm doing or not doing. I've tried different tricks, EQing the left and right different, using a different speaker on them, and it seems like nothing really works that much to fix that issue. But in case anyone listening isn't familiar, if you sum a most big metal and rock mixes, you sum it to mono, the guitars just go way down in volume. There's phase cancellation that happens, and suddenly you can hear the vocals and the kick and the snare and the bass really clear, and the guitars kind of disappear. And it's better and worse in some different records. But do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I do have one approach, and I think this is the old analog upbringing coming out of me, where we had the biggest issues with drums, with phase issues. We always used to have phase cancellation in drums, or frequency spikes that you don't want, unwanted frequencies, like used to drive us crazy. Which is what we're referring to before. It's good going to a studio to record acoustic drums with someone who knows the room, who knows when they do the overhead mics and other mics that there is going to be as little phase issues as possible. So my approach is there's always going to be phase issues, and it's best to look at them as in phase characteristics. So when you're adding different guitars together, because if you're dealing with a band that has multiple cabs, for example, that you're miking up, the possibilities of there being phase issues is pretty much guaranteed, close to it. So then I kind of always learn how to work with it. It's like, all right, how can we use these phasing results that we're getting to make it sound as best as what we can? Because it's never going to be 100% uncancelability or whatever the word might be, the extension of that.
Yeah. Phase coherence.
If that means coherent, yeah.
Yeah.
It's always going to be there to some extent. So it's kind of a case of, if you can, the dream way of working is use it to your advantage. If there are some harsh tones there that are making it too crackly, you might be able to use the phase cancellation to get rid of that, or to help emphasize the more richness dynamics that you might be looking in whatever tones you're working with, guitar or drums, or even sometimes with vocals. I think phase cancellation happens a bucket load with vocals that is definitely overlooked too much.
Yeah.
When you hear mixes where they've got like 8 vocals coming in and out, and there's some parts of the songs where you're like, that sounds really different, and then it breaks off into another part of the song and it sounds a lot more open and a lot more different, and you're like, because they haven't put these other ones in there that are obviously altering it, or whatever the case might be. And yeah, so that's kind of my attitude towards it when I think about phase issues or phase possibilities, is try to make it into the characters, because you'll drive yourself crazy trying to get rid of them 100% to get that perfect crystal capture.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, I was noticing something yesterday, testing out 2 different drum sample libraries on the same mix, and I didn't change anything else. And I was just trying to work up a mix with another one that I liked equally as what I had. And I don't know if any of it had to do much with phase exactly, but I had to do so much tweaking. Like I noticed I got this new kit sounding good, I thought. But then I listened to the other mix and I thought that one sounds so much better. But what was which that happens, but what was strange to me was that the guitars, the quality of the guitars were so different. And I didn't change them at all. They weren't touched. I didn't touch the master EQ. It was just swapping out the drums. Suddenly the mids of the guitars were behaving totally different with the guitars. The mids of the guitar, with the drums. And so and it made it almost sound like I was using a different amp or a different speaker. between these two mixes, and I thought that was really strange. And I guess I've never built the same mix with two different drum kits to directly compare it like that. And
it's rare that you do. So
no, yeah, and I mean, like, I've known that. I've known how big of a important thing the drums are when it comes to guitar tone. And, I'm often telling people online, like, yeah, you worry about your guitar tone, but also, like, worry about your drum tone just as much. And it's hard if you're just a guitarist and you're not really, like, engineering and producing stuff. But, like, to me, it's really hard to just pick a guitar tone out of the blue and say, wow, this is an amazing guitar tone, because you might put it in a mix and it just falls apart, and you end up having to tweak it. And that's true with everything. I think I was watching Andrew Sheps the other day saying, like, don't ever solo anything, which I'm definitely guilty of. Trying to fix stuff in solo. Yeah. But he was just like, what is the point? Like, you're not going to EQ in solo. You shouldn't compress in solo. Like, mostly I try to use it for editing, so I can hear that my edits are good. But when it actually comes to mixing, I still do. It's like it's a habit that I'm just like, oh, I want to fix these guitars. Well, throw them into solo and I'll tweak the EQs and stuff. And it's like, no, I'm gonna try to not do that, because I realize it's the relationship between the guitars and the drums and the bass and the vocals is so much more than those things just combined, and it's really hard to predict that combination. It all sort of gets cooked together like a soup, and it becomes something new. And yeah, you just don't hear that in solo, because it might sound fine in solo. And
yeah, I remember doing one album for a band, and the start of the song started off with a drum roll, and then they kick into a big groove, and it very cool, very well constructed and put together. And when I was mixing it, I was like, that song sounds awesome. The drums are pumping. They're sounding big. They're sounding large. They're really dynamic, because he had like it was like a 9-piece or 10-piece drum kit. So it was huge. And I mic'd the crap out of it too. So I had a lot of options to work with. I did it and I'm like, that sounds cool. Then when I went back and listened to it from the start of the song, I was like, the snare sounds like rubbish. What the hell? When it was just isolated with him doing the drums by themselves. Until the song kicked in, then the snare sounded like, it's kind of like I went from a $10 snare to a $10,000 snare. And I think that is another example of what you were saying in regards to you should never solo it. This turned out that it soloed it just by how the song was composed and put together. And now whenever I listen to it, that was such a big lesson for me, because now I listen to it, I'm like, at first I hated those intro snares, but now I really like it because I know what it leads into. And now I know what it goes into, and that's a natural acoustic world of how it all works.
Yeah. No, and snares are really tricky. I mean, it's just it's incredibly difficult. Yeah, I mean, it's such a central part of the sound, and it's also it can be really difficult, especially working with these like sample libraries, where I've got one snare drum that I'm used to hearing it with, and then try to test out some other ones, and it seems like nothing else is ever better than whatever I started with. Yeah. Just because like I built the mix around it, I'm used to hearing it, and anything else sounds immediately like wrong, and which is, it's too bad but sometimes it's good not to get the option paralysis and start deconstructing everything.
And that's the thing with that I try my best not to get caught into, is analysis paralysis. With all the different amp sims I've got now and all the different pedals and all the different options, it's like you could be there forever. Yeah. Just going backwards and forwards. And as we said before, you tweak one thing, that's going to alter everything else. So then you've got to start tweaking everything to see how that original thing you tweaked is going to sit and how it's going to work. Yeah. And there's a point where you just got to go, this is how we're going. Here's a foundation, and I'm building from here.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Did you see my video the other day testing out all the different amps? I did like a blind shootout. Yeah.
Oh, I loved it, but there's zero chance. And I thought it kind of going in. I was like, all right, I know all these amp sims roughly. Yeah, I don't own them all, but I know them roughly, and I know the companies. So I'll give it a crack. I can give it a crack. I put headphones on for it, so I'm like, yep, I'm going to give myself the best thing while I was out at work. I'm like, I'm going to get one of them right. Not one.
I mean, everyone who tried in the comments, they usually got 0 out of 6.
Like,
I don't think I could do it, honestly. I mean, like, and I spent like, I don't know, a couple hours over weeks, like going back and forth, dialing them in, and like, I might be able to get some of it, but I think I would just attribute a lot of that to how I know they were EQ'd, you know, a little differently. But I tried to get them as close as possible. I was really surprised. I mean, like, I thought that they would be, I kind of wanted to prove that amp sims have gotten way better, because that was my opinion. That, like, you know, because I've been doing this a long time with amp sims. I mean, I started to get into them as soon as they sort of came out, because I love the idea. I've always had amps around, but it's just nice to be able to like play on your computer with headphones and be able to try out all these different amps that, like, I'm not going to go out and spend $2,000 on a dual rectifier and then go out and get a 5150 the next week, you know, but I can sit through and, you know, just test them all out, get a sense of the flavor. And I mean, I do think some parts of it have gotten way better over the years, but I was surprised that, that the old ones basically held up just as fine to the new ones. Yeah.
Look, they're ever so slight different characteristics.
Yeah, there are.
Which is fine. But I kind of I see it the same as like what digital audio workshop you're going to be using, or what guitar you're going to be using. There's a point where it's like, what is best for you? They can all do the same thing. They're going to get you from A to B to C to D. So which one do you prefer? Yeah. That's it.
Exactly.
Like, I love checking out new gear, and new is VST. I love all that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's whichever one's most comfortable for you. Like, I love using the SSL plugins because I've used them for years. And I worked in studios where I used to use the analog ones. So it was expensive and they were loud. You need a whole new room for the computers and fans and everything to get it working. The original ones. But because I was so used to it, when I got the VST plugin, I was like, I know how to use this. Now, I'm not going to stay here and say, here we go, they're the best, they're the golden, you don't need anything else. No, you need what's best for you. And that's how I've always tried to promote it and to talk about it whenever I do with other friends and whatnot. It's like, they all do the same thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, whichever's most comfortable for you.
Yeah, and I'm exactly. I feel like I'm not sure what to do with the knowledge that they're all kind of so similar. And then it's just like, well, so am I just picking like which one I want to look at for the next couple hours, and which one? I mean, I do think that the ones that have more features, and I was recently testing out the new Bulldog from Audio Assault, and I like that a lot, and I'll have a video up on that soon. Well, before this is out, but that one I do like just because it has a bunch of cool features on the front, and I've played the Pitbull in real life, and it is a nice amp for that reason, because it has so many extra buttons and knobs and you know, built-in EQ on the front. It's like got more features than almost any other amp that I've seen. It's not a simple amp. It's definitely like a tweaker's amp, which I like. I figure if you're gonna go for that, then go for it. And I have a Carvin bass amp that's the same thing. It's got parametric and graphic EQs and a compressor built in, and that's great because it saves space on my pedal board for stuff that it doesn't have. I don't need to run an EQ pedal or a compressor so I like that. But then I kind of think, well, maybe the character of the distortion is not really exactly what the amp sim matters for. You know, maybe it's almost more about the EQ you like, and what kind of features it has that you might want to use. However, I don't think I'll go back to using the old Poolin plugins just because I have to load up too many separate things. And I really like the Neural DSP and the Audio Assault, like the fact that it's got effects and amp and cab and tuner and everything
it's
built
all
in
there in one
plugin. Yeah. I'm not going back from that. It's just convenience. But so I enjoy that. With the SSL plugins and the channel strip mentality. I've got some nice ones. I got the SSL native ones. Was lucky enough to pick those up on sale because they're like 400 something new. It's ridiculous for 2 plugins. But I got them on sale for $50, and I thought, okay, that's a good enough deal. So I use them wherever I can now. It's just the bus compressor and the channel strip. But they have a nice looking interface. I've tested out like the Waves ones too. But have you ever tried building out like a template with just like the channel strips on everything and mixing into it kind of as an imaginary console?
Yeah, I have. Yep. I did that for one of my first recordings that I did because I didn't have all the songs in one session. So we had 11 songs. So I set up a template with everything set the same.
Yeah.
So whenever I dumped a mix down from that, I knew it was going through the same plugins with the same settings, and it was all duplicated.
Yeah.
Which now I prefer to do just a one session.
Oh, really?
Just keep it all there, all in one line. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I used to work with just doing like song by song, and now I always try to do albums in one project file. It's way too much to try to do separate songs, but are you saying that you prefer to just do individual songs now? Or no?
No, I don't. I prefer to do one session now.
Yeah. No, I agree.
I'll do individual songs for composing, and then when it comes to, I kind of treat it like, this is once again the mid-90s coming out of me. So I first do like the cassette tape capture first, where I do the songs individual sessions, and then when it's time to do the actual multi-tracking for it, then I'll create one session and start laying down all the drums and all the different time changes and everything in the one session, what order the songs are going to be in, so it's all there and ready to go. Then I'll record all the guitars and everything to those drums, and then the bass to those. So I kind of do, which is, I know is a very old way of thinking, where I like to get my drums down first, mix them down to 80%, do bass, mix them down to 80%, do guitars, mix in at 80%, and then when I've got everything, then I'll fill in the extra 10% here and there, then the final 10% here and there when I've got everything to kind of work with and against. So the ghost tracks that I use for them are probably, like, I don't care. I use VST plugins. I'll use a real amp and run it through a load box. I don't care because they're just ghost tracks and they're just there. As long as they're in time, I don't care.
Yeah. They have to be good enough to track the drums too, if you are tracking live drums.
Yes.
But yeah. No, I agree. And that's what I did with my last album too, is just recording all the scratch guitars, and I did program drums. I ended up basically making a whole fully fledged demo. I didn't do like vocal harmonies or solos or anything, but got the guitars and the main vocal arrangement there, and then went back and recorded the real drums, and then edited those, and then did the guitars again. And I think I did them again after that, because I was doing it through my real amp, and I had a tone, but then I was like, I think I could do better, and I was stupid. And I didn't record DIs, so I couldn't reamp it. So I went back and actually just retracked the whole thing, which, I learned the hard way, but that's okay. Yeah. But yeah, it's just doing it that way. And I wanted to sort of get as analog as possible with, using real drums, even though I ended up having to like edit my performances a lot because I'm just not as tight of a drummer as I wish I was. And so it's artificial in that I had to edit so much. And I ended up editing like almost everything like beat for beat. I wasn't making huge corrections, but just ended up getting super nitpicky about like shifting everything around. I probably spent 30, 40 hours editing drums. It was ridiculous. It took me weeks. It wasn't fun. So I'm not going to do that again.
Especially when drummers do multiple takes for the one song.
Yeah.
And you got to crossfade it and find to get that sweet spot to get it in, so the hearer can't recognize when the change is.
Yeah. Oh, it's hard.
That can take so long.
Yeah. No, I figure like my mentality now is like, since I'm the one recording and editing and performing, it's like if I'm going to play the drums, I'm going to make sure that I get the best take I can get, And then, if I have to do any edits, I want to get done in 10 minutes,
Yeah.
I can take a few takes and like comp it, get a couple of different bits and pieces. That's normal, but I don't want to ever go back. Like, I'm glad I learned how to do it if I ever have a client that's like, hey, we need to edit this whole album. But man, I don't even know what I would begin to have to charge to do that, because it would be so much work. But I know how to do it, and that's good. But yeah, I figure like, if I want a perfectly tight performance, I'll just use sample drums. I don't care. I don't really have any beef with it. I don't know. At this point, it's like there's so many records that are sample replaced anyways, that are time aligned anyways. And nobody really wants to hear like sloppy drumming. So unless you're just a really fantastic, John Bonham, and you can play off the grid in a musical way, if we're gonna end up correcting it, like, and we're gonna end up sample replacing it, why not use samples from the beginning? Like, I know it's wrong.
I agree.
But is it so wrong? Like, we're all doing it. I feel like we've got a whole generation of people doing it and complaining about it. Like, I wish producers didn't just sample everything. But meanwhile, I'm gonna sample everything. How many people are, and how many of the people who hate samples have ever sat there and spent hours editing a drum performance? Or listening to an unedited drum performance and saying, yeah, I'm gonna put that on a record. Like, that's just fine. You have to be a really good drummer to do that. And props to those who can. I wish I was that good. That's why I practice. But maybe in 5 or 10 years, I'll be good enough to not worry about editing performances. But I've been playing like 15 years and I still suck. So, maybe I just need to practice drums more. But